100%. So again, what makes this especially mind-blowing with Tulsi Gabbard is the fact that she did endorse Bernie Sanders back in 2016, someone who was very obviously trying to increase our government's ability to insure its citizens, for example, and provide other basic social infrastructure, social programs, welfare state, whatever you want to call it. So this is especially hilarious and just totally ironic and hypocritical, given that she's now divulging this kind of rhetoric. The government is already too big and powerful as it is. That doesn't sound like a Bernie supporter. That sounds like a fucking libertarian. The Build Back Better bill will only make it worse. So here, let's take a look at the video, guys. I want to be fair to Ms. Gabbard and hear this from the horse's mouth.
With the bill that they're continuing to push forward is that our government is too powerful and too big even as it is, and this bill is only going to make matters worse. The provisions in the bill are so vague that really it's going to be unelected bureaucrats who end up deciding how these provisions are implemented, and no accountability. And really it'll empower them to be able to stick their noses into every aspect of our lives, furthering this cradle to grave mentality of government dependence that makes us lose even more of our autonomy as we are paying for it. As government gets bigger, our wallets are getting smaller.
That sounds like Joe Manchin. That's exactly what Joe Manchin's been saying. If your politics don't align with Joe Manchin, I don't think Tulsi's did up until now. This is like I think she's on like, what, is she on Sean Hannity or some shit for this, or is it a different clip where she was on Sean Hannity? No. Okay. This is what he wants to hear. This is the Dave Rubin politics, the why I left the left. Oh, the left is just so crazy now. They want to give people a fucking infrastructure bill. Do you guys realize that she's saying she is literally adopting and employing the argument that we told you guys that all of the most neoliberal fucking conservatives would employ. We told you it would happen on this fucking podcast. Go roll the tape if you need to. What they're going to do, highlight this one bill, the BIF bill. See, we already passed an infrastructure bill. Now these crazy, deranged socialists want to spend another $3 trillion that's completely unregulated. We don't know what's going to happen to it, just so that they can spy on you, just so that they can interfere on your life, tell you how to live. Who does that sound like? That sounds like a fear-mongering fucking conservative. It's absolutely redonkulous to me that she's made this pivot, and it's impossible to me. It is fucking impossible to me that she's had some ideological awakening, this fucking degeneration of her fucking principles, but rather I think she's just fucking pivoted to where she's like, oh, I think that this is like a cash crop for me. Fucking pathetic, man.
Yeah, it's totally insane. And again, how can you go from supporting socialist policies of Bernie Sanders to now this Reagan rhetoric of like, government's too big, cradle to grave fucking economics or whatever? Listen to this shit.
As government gets bigger, our wallets are getting smaller.
That's just patently fucking false. What are you talking about? What the fuck are you talking about? And especially because remember towards the end of her campaign when she desperately tried to get Andrew Yang's endorsement by embracing UBI? Are you fucking kidding me? It's so obvious that she's the most shameless goddamn grifter of all time. But speaking of Tulsi Gabbard, I wanted to react to a little bit of a recent segment on Rising on the Hill, because they were discussing a little bit about the 2024 GOP primary. And there's some interesting stuff to react to in here too about Mike Pence and his potential ambition. So we can talk about all of this, but they do get into Tulsi a little bit too. And specifically, pondering about whether or not she might have more presidential ambitions. Of course, she miserably failed in the Democratic primary, but maybe she'll try to now, try her hand in the Republican primary. That would be pretty hilarious. But let's take a look at this and see if you think there's any merit to these ideas.
Well, speaking of Republican presidential candidates, Tulsi Gabbard was on Fox News recently.
Yeah.
And, she has, for a long time, was kind of a kind of contrarian within Democratic circles, but she always had, a foot in the Democratic Party, or she would use lingo, or she would frame her position in left-wing terms, even as that position itself kind of drifted more conservative and conservative. Recent appearance on Fox News, when she was asked about the Build Back Better Act, she dropped all of the pretense. It's just pure, uncut, Reaganism. So let's take a look. This is Tulsi Gabbard.
Here's the reality with the bill that they're continuing to push forward is that our government is too powerful and too big even as it is, and this bill is only going to make matters worse. The provisions in the bill are so vague that really it's going to be unelected bureaucrats who end up deciding how these provisions are implemented, and no accountability. And really it'll empower them to be able to stick their noses into every aspect of our lives, furthering this cradle to grave mentality of government dependence that makes us lose even more of our autonomy as we are paying for it. As government gets bigger, our wallets are getting smaller.
Hey, as government's getting bigger, our wallets are getting smaller.
So that's who her crowd
Cradle
is
to
now.
grave.
Emily Jasinski is the new target audience for Tulsi Gabbard, and I just want everybody to bask in that for a moment. That's one of my main reasons for wanting to watch this entire clip.
Oh yeah, 100%. And Emily Jasinski, I mean, with all due respect, is not exactly. You couldn't even call her like a populist Republican, like a Sagar and Jetty type. Like she's a totally, normie Republican, just like a movement conservative Republican. So yeah, that's absolutely revealing that this is who Tulsi Gabbard is now appealing to, is the likes of her.
Yeah, she calls
Dependency.
herself a
Listen,
true con, which means true conservative, i.e. not in favor of social spending like somebody like Sagar might be.
Yeah, I think she's also fairly pro-war.
Like it, right? It's what's
And
interesting.
she's talking to you. She's not talking to me
That's
anymore.
society.
Well,
the
yeah, she's
paper.
definitely not
Right.
talking to you anymore. And that's because, so what's interesting to me about this is that I've been waiting sort of for Democrats to jump on that, because does it sound like uncut Reaganism, as you said? Yes. But actually it sounds like the Democratic Party up until very recently. And it sounds like Bill Clinton. It sounds like the way a lot of Democrats would react if you explained, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, what Joe Biden's Build Back Better agenda looks like. That's how a lot of Democrats would have reacted. But with the IRS provision, for instance, what Republicans and Democrats.
Also, thanks, Steve, for the $2. Really appreciate that. Tulsi for GOP President 24. That's basically what we're talking about right now. Just the seeming prospect of her running for the Republican nomination. Again, having failed in the Democratic Party, it's now her time to grift the right. So let's see if she can succeed in a Republican primary. And also, let's be honest, guys, the point of Tulsi Gabbard or people like Tulsi Gabbard running in the Democrat or Republican primary is not actually to become president. It's to get a shit ton of attention in media, to have headlines written about you and become get more clout online, have people talking about you, searching for you on Google, etc. Or to try to become the vice president. That's also what would be going on there. She would be trying to get herself on that short list for VP by, again, increasing her name recognition, increasing her clout, and making more of a national presence.
Yeah, I mean, you've been saying it for a while that she might try and throw her head into GOP politics. I mean, she certainly has the anti-trans rhetoric down that sells like hotcakes to fucking Republican voters oftentimes. So, I mean, this is like an entire downward spiral from Tulsi Gabbard. I don't know. It'll just be fucking dreary to watch her fucking go ahead and grift in a new direction. Like, and I don't want to, like, if somebody disagrees with me, that's fine. But I think with Tulsi Gabbard adopting a 180% ideological pivot out of nowhere, other than the fact that her last presidential run was dog shit, and she realized that she had a really big fan base that also like Jocko Willink and the Joe Rogan Experience, like she's pivoting to where those people's politics are. And I just think that that's really obvious, and that's a bummer. Because it's a clear cash grab, and not to be taken seriously as somebody who's like actually like defending their own fucking values. Like, there are people who I massively disagree with that I think are like scum of the earth, but they genuinely believe what they're saying. I think you can smell Tulsi as a fraud from a mile of fucking way when she talks about this shit.
Yeah, I totally agree. And she's even completely dropped the anti-war rhetoric. I never hear her talking about that shit anymore. It's not like her criticism of the Build Back Better plan was like, maybe we should be paying for this by defunding the Pentagon and reallocating those resources into passing this sort of legislation. I would have been on board with that. It's not like I'm 100% pro Build Back Better Act. I think it's a totally gutted bill too. I think at this point it is mostly a corporate handout. So it's not, I'm not standing up for the Build Back Better bill. I'm not saying that, it's above criticism or whatever. No, I have many criticisms of it. My criticism, however, of it is not that it's going to increase government, this dumb shit libertarian talking point. So yeah, that's my issue with this,